Hi, it's Stephen Shalowitz here from the One Way Ticket Show. I'm excited to announce our new YouTube channel where we're featuring some of our classic episodes and releasing new ones as well. Do subscribe to the channel and make sure you ring that bell below so you never miss an episode.
From New York City, I'm Stephen Shalowitz, and this is the One Way Ticket Show. Hello and welcome once again to another episode of the show where we explore with our guests where they'd go if given a one-way ticket, no coming back. Their destinations may be in the past, present, future, real, imaginary, or even a state of mind, but once again, the only caveat, there's no coming back. Now, you can listen to all episodes on our website, theonewayticketshow.com. Once again, theonewayticketshow.com. Or you can search for The One Way Ticket Show wherever you like to download your podcasts. And of course, while you're at it, do rate and review us to make it easier for more people around the world to find us. All right, as for this episode, it's an absolute honor to welcome Curtis Silwa to the program. Curtis is New York City's Republican mayoral candidate. He goes up against the Democratic candidate, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, in the general election on Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. And we did have Eric Adams on episode 168 of the program back in January 2019, which is a whole lifetime ago. Now, apart from his run for NYC's highest office, you may know Curtis is the founder of the Guardian Angels, or is a widely popular radio talk show host and news commentator. There's never a shortage of topics to cover with Curtis, who joins us now via Zoom from his campaign headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. Curtis, I know you have a crazy schedule. We've been trying to set this up for the longest time, so it's truly, as I said, an absolute honor to finally welcome you aboard the One Way Ticket Show.
Oh, well, my pleasure. My ticket gets punched today, not in my campaign headquarters on 34th and 7th, but in my 328 square foot apartment that I share with my wife, Nancy, and 16 rescue cats on the Upper West Side. So we've changed venues. My ticket gets punched differently today.
Those 16 rescue cats, because the last I checked, you had 13 rescue cats. So it seems that you've added 3 to the brew.
Yeah, well, my wife rescues them from the shelters right before they get euthanized, which generally within 72 hours if somebody surrenders their dog or cat or other animal. And she scrupulously looks at the kill list. And at the last second, when no one has come forward to claim that cat or any rescue group has come forward, she'll immediately run to animal rescue and control and then take that cat and bring it here and try to nurse it back to shape and then eventually adopt it out. But we're up to 16. That's why I need to get into Gracie Mansion, where I know there's room enough for 60 or more, and then we can put into place no-kill shelters so we don't have to worry about that.
Well, I was going to talk about animal welfare in the course of our conversation, and we should give a shout out to your very talented wife, Nancy Regula, who's the director of animal protection at the Guardian Angels. Listen, with all of those cats, I first want to know how many litter boxes and who cleans them, Curtis?
Well, Nancy does the bulk of the work in terms of maintaining the cats and preparing them for adoption, or the older ones that nobody really would want to adopt, because they have all kinds of the same human conditions that we develop when we're getting old: diabetes, high blood pressure, tension, all those things that we associate with humans. And so she takes care of them so that they have a long and really good life. Which is what we should guarantee all animals. We shouldn't be euthanizing any animals unless we have absolutely no choice. But we have 3 different litter boxes. Occasionally I change it and get a double hernia, but Nancy changes for the bulk of the times 3 times a day to make sure we don't get asphyxiated in here.
I can imagine. And I should say that I actually adopted my senior cat several years ago at the ACC. I think it's called something else right now, on East 110th Street. And really, I'm in complete agreement with you in terms of closing down those kill shelters. Absolutely. We're going to talk about your policy issues in the course of our conversation, including just talking about animal rights in the course of our discussion. But I really want to, first of all, issue your one-way ticket, Curtis. So without further ado, Curtis Sliwa, as I ask all my guests that come on the program for the last 9.5 years, if I gave you a one-way ticket, past, present, future, real, imaginary, even a state of mind, where would you go?
Oh, there's no doubt. I'm a radio guy, as you mentioned, and I believe in theater of the mind because, let's face it, video images pretty much tell you what the storyline is or the narrative is. And I prefer the words that people will use to paint a picture. And I first heard this broadcast so many years ago. I can imagine what my relatives were thinking when radio was king, when there was no TV, the War of the Worlds, when all of a sudden from a tiny town in New Jersey, I don't know, Grover's Mill or something like that, Orson Welles was talking about how the aliens had descended upon this area and were beginning to expand their wave and heading into all different directions and towards New York City itself. Now, you could imagine we were on the cusp of World War II, the Nazis marching through Europe, the Japanese marching through Asia. And it probably was very plausible to most, probably one of the most amazing actions of creating theater of the mind that has ever existed. And I would have wished that I was back there listening to my little radio that people were dependent on to find out what was going on all over the world. It was such an incredible divisive time and fearful time for a lot of people. Suddenly have that booming voice and all of the characters that participated in that presentation on, I think it was CBS radio. I would have loved to have been sitting and listening to that and feeling what appeared to be an invasion by not illegal aliens, not by Canada Goose, Canada geese, which have invaded our area in the tri-state and left their poop all over the place, but rather aliens from outer space. And if you notice nowadays, the talk is UFOs. Our government was sitting on these sealed for years. Apparently, they really did exist.
So that's your one-way ticket destination, is to the theater of the mind, back to the War of the Worlds, the time of Orson Welles.
Also, just listening to radio at that time, because you can imagine now, you can turn on CNN, the BBC, and you get a international portrait of what is happening all over the globe. Back then, you had to depend on radio. And imagine listening to this guy, Adolf Hitler, screaming into a microphone, hearing the jackboots as they were marching from city to city, just like taking it over. And then likewise, the Japanese through Asia. You probably felt like the walls were closing in on us. And then at that time, you had all different types of individuals who were using radio as their bully pulpit. You had FDR, who would sort of speak to the nation in his fireside chats. Then you also had Father Coughlin out of Detroit, a virulent anti-Semite. And you had other known personalities who would create an image, theater of the mind, through an ability to speak over the radio. There was no TV. You'd go to a movie, you'd see a few of those news flicks in between movies. But that's why radio is so important. And I would have loved to live in that area when radio was king, when you really had your mind stimulated. I call it the medulla and cerebellum stimulated, so that you could actually picture what the broadcaster was talking about.
Would you like to have been a broadcaster then, as well as a listener, Curtis?
Oh, absolutely, because I think that's my forte, theater of the mind, piecing together words to give the listener an opportunity to see it for themselves. During my length of time on WABC radio, which at one point the acronym stood for Always Broadcasting Curtis, I would indulge in theater of the mind, especially when I did overnight radio, because I had listened to the very best as a child. Long John Neville and Candy Jones, they were on WMCA when it was the #1 talk station in New York. And Long John had convinced me that Candy Jones, his wife, was a CIA agent. He would interview all kinds of authors. And there was one who talked about how he had dug a hole right through the core of the earth from Bayonne, New Jersey, the gateway to the world, to, at that time, it was called Peking, China, mainland China, Red China. And it seemed very plausible because Long John would be, absolutely plausible, very cogent of you to discuss that particular layer, inner layer of the earth. And it was so great, such a relief from the day-to-day news that oftentimes would just fry your brain. This allowed your mind to explore that. And then there was Art Bell, the Looney Kazoonie from Parts Unknown, who was heard across the nation at night, who actually began listening to radio himself in Paterson, New Jersey on a rooftop because his dad was a building superintendent. He used to keep the old Sony AM radio to his ear. We shared a lot of our stories of growing up listening to radio. So, yeah, I'm a radio guy through and through. And I would love living through that area where everybody was dependent, not only for their news, but also their entertainment vis-a-vis the radio.
What do you think the people then would make of our communication landscape then today and our media landscape?
Overload, too much overload, too much information, and too much opinion. Because everybody now wants to give you information with their own particular slant to it. You know, that's why it's a relief. You go to Europe, you go to South America, they don't fool you. They say we're right-wing publication, we're a left-wing publication. Nobody says they're fair and balanced. But here in America, oh, no, we're not biased. Hey, everybody's biased in their life. Just give me the information as you're regurgitating it. And if I have enough time, maybe I'll be able to listen to the same information from somebody else. I have a feeling back then, though, it was just giving you as much news as they could possibly give you. Because remember, sometimes they were getting it on teletype. They were getting information from sources. Again, it was very stimulating to be able to hear it for the very first time in radio form. Whereas now you expect it's a 24-hour news cycle. They boom it out, they repeat it. And they obviously, they're always just trying to press the issue to get even more divisive. So they'll get more eyeballs watching for longer periods of time. Whereas everyone back then was dependent on the radio. There was no other means. Newspapers, it would take maybe 2, 3, 4 days for a story to surface in a newspaper. Whereas radio could be instantaneous.
Is there anyone that you would like to take with you back in time to that period? And is there anyone in particular that you would like to meet there?
That's interesting. Who would I like to? Obviously, I take my wife, Nancy, back then because she's a hipster and millennial. And I'm a baby boomer. So it's quite the difference in age groups. We think in many instances totally differently. And I'm sure, because she is very inquisitive also, she would have loved going back in that time machine. She's of Polish heritage, so I'm sure she would have wanted to see specifically what Polish Americans were doing. I'm also of Polish heritage, but Italian heritage. It was such a great time, though. I mean, as contentious as it is, we think we're in contentious times, divisive times. Can you imagine? Madison Square Garden had bunts, Nazis showing up in brown shirts, going Sieg Heil to either Benito Mussolini, a few Italians would show up for that, and the bunts for Adolf Hitler, Germans would show up for that, and others. Imagine filling up Madison Square Garden, the old Madison Square Garden on 50th and 8th Avenue, 20,000 people pledging allegiance to fascists. And then you had communists back then, too, hardcore, with supporting, Uncle Joe Stalin. They were true believers. For all that we have going on today, Antifa, Democrat Socialists of America, there's nothing comparable to that era because, boy, things were changing so fast, so furiously.
Right. And anyone in particular you would want to meet during that period of time?
Anybody I'd want to meet.
I mean, like an Edward R. Murrow, for example.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to meet a broadcaster. I would want to meet a character of that time. I would say the populist governor of Louisiana who ended up getting shot and killed, who actually pushed FDR to the far, far left. But I can identify with that, having been shot 5 times myself on the orders of the guy east of the Gambino. Luckily, I survived. But he was quite the character. The populist pushing it to the left, suggesting that he would run for president, believer in all kinds of social programs, the kingfish. That's what he was referred to. I would have loved to have met him because apparently he was quite the codger, quite the personality, quite the curmudgeon. And those are the kind of people I like because they're always pushing the envelope. I don't like to go with the traditionalists. I certainly would have liked to have sat down with him and figured out, what are you thinking? because you're also getting wine-dined and pocket-lined down there in Louisiana, the state of massive corruption, and yet you were perceived of as the man of the people, the poor, the impoverished, the indigent. I think I would welcome meeting Kingfish.
By the way, who would take care of the 16 cats while you went on your one-way ticket journey, or would you take them with you?
No, we would take them with us. There's no doubt about it. The cats, they're a part of our family. You know, they're not furry little friends. They're a part of our family. They all have very unique personalities, and we've got to care for them as they care for us. You know, I came out of the hospital, Columbia Presbyterian. I had chronic Crohn's disease, 8.5-hour operation, and my blood pressure was skyrocketing. The medicines they were giving me weren't working. Some of the rescue cats knew instinctively to lay on my chest. And do you know, my blood pressure dropped? I had read about that. I couldn't believe it. My wife, Nancy, said, "Oh, you really got to try this. It's known that cats will instinctively do this." And they started to do it. In fact, the patriarch of our cat colony at that time, Hercules, who was a Siamese cat, he was the first to lay on my diaphragm. And the blood pressure dropped incredibly, just naturally, because the cats understood that I was in dire need. And obviously the medication was not working at all. So no, they would come with us because we help them and they help us.
Curtis, a very dear friend of mine, was going through chemo for breast cancer, and she has 2 cats. One of the cats would never approach her, but every time she came home from chemo to lie in her bed, the cat snuggled up against her. They're very, very smart.
Oh, no doubt. My wife, Nancy, who I am responsible for her having migraine headache after migraine headache. At times, she's like paralyzed in pain. She's also running against Gail Brewer on the Upper West Side, first Republican to run on the Upper West Side for city council in 10 years, all animal welfare platforms. But she'll be laying there and nothing seems to work, you know, no Tylenol, Advil. And then the cats instinctively surround her. I mean, about half of the colony, you're talking about 8 cats, they'll be on the bedside, they'll come up to her, they'll rub her, they'll sniff her. And that has a very sort of homeopathic, holistic method of causing her to be very calm at a time where she's shaking because of the pains that she sometimes gets from those migraine headaches. It's amazing to watch, you know, just reading about it and other people telling you about it. It's not like actually experiencing it yourself. It's part of our holistic homeopathic lifestyle here.
Right, very therapeutic. 1 or 2 more points in your one-way ticket journey, and then we'll move on to some of the points in your platform for the mayor's race. What would you hope to really get out of the experience then of your one-way ticket back to that, as you said, the theater of the mind, back to the, let's say, 1930s and early 1940s?
To better understand the greatest generation. We only read about it. We only heard about it. That's my dad and mother's generation. I understand all that they poured into myself and my 2 sisters. They gave everything. It was always us and we, not I and me. Having survived the Depression, I would have liked to have experienced a little of that, which I would have in the late 30s because we hadn't gotten out of the Depression. So to just know what they went through, that really created the kind of generation that they were, to provide everything for us and really ask very little for themselves. I would really wanted to have experienced that because we don't have that nowadays. Nowadays, in some ways, we're a universal society. We think globally, and that's good. But in other ways, we're so selfish. You know, it's always I and me, not us and we.
Did that flame for you to serve the community then come from your parents? Because, you know, clearly you've been at this since you started recycling as a teen, and then from there, it's only grown. So did that actually come from your parents? Because I was going to ask you how that period really impacted you and how you carry on that period into your life today. And it seems that that actually came from your parents.
Oh, yeah. My mother, Francesca, who was Barese on the Italian side, she was very religious, Roman Catholic. I, on the reverse, I'm an AMP Catholic. Ashes on Wednesday, palms on Sunday, then you don't for a month of Sundays. She would always say, A selfless service brings you closer to God. Poverty brings you closer to God. He was very chaste, along with my aunts. So, we'd go to novenas, do the Stations of the Cross, church to the point it was like, read already, enough of this. But I could see they were real believers. Selfless service brings you closer to God. And they derive great joy out of it. Now, my father was more like me. He was not a religious guy. He was more of a Unitarian. He was a labor guy in the National Maritime Union. He raised me on Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, hardcore Democrat. He was not a Reagan Democrat, Giuliani Democrat. He always told me Republicans, they got their beaks in that trough. Rich son, you got to go Democrat. He wouldn't have voted for me today if he was alive. Luckily, I have an independent party line in which he and my mother, Francesca, could, but they only voted Democrats. But he would always say, son, there by the grace of God, go you. As he would see the homeless, the emotionally disturbed down in the Bowery, he would take me specifically, which used to have the missions, the flop houses, used to be where a lot of the single able-bodied men would live. And he said, there by the grace of God, go you. Curtis, just do good things in your life and you will get good things in return. Don't ever ask when, where, or how. Just do it. And I saw that he got tremendous knockers, tremendous enjoyment from this, as my mother did. They didn't have money. But boy, this was better than all the money in the world. And I said, I want to get joy out of the things that I do in life. And let's face it, I'm not rolling in dope. I live in a very small apartment, but I get to live the kind of life that I want to with my wife, Nancy, and our 16 rescue cats. And I have tremendous knockers every day because when I wake up, I said, this is a day I shouldn't have had. I should have been dead and buried a long time ago. So I got to continue to do good in this world.
Yeah. Like you're the first guest in 9.5 years that's been arrested 77 times, that's been shot at the orders of John Gotti, as you referenced earlier on in the show. So clearly someone up there is looking out for you. And that's one of the reasons why I would imagine you have given back all throughout your life. Indeed. Listen, Curtis, there are so many other elements to unpack when it comes to your one-way ticket journey that I'd love to have you back, but I'd like to pivot now to some of the policy platforms within your candidacy. So once again, congrats for throwing your red beret into the ring. And, you've been at the forefront of protecting people for 42 years. Guardian Angels, founded 1979. We should say that now in 13 countries, 130 cities worldwide. And I know crime and safety are really top priorities for you. And I want to touch on them, but I also want to touch on the other issues of the day because you're really known for so much more than just prevention of crime and promotion of safety. And should you win, the red beret will come off and you will become mayor for everybody here in the city of New York. So I first want to just ask you real briefly to talk about your property tax plan because you really want to level the playing field. And I will say, when I went onto the website, there was a little factoid that I did not know. And I especially want you to highlight this one because I clearly did not get the memo that Madison Square Garden does not pay any property tax. And that's $42.4 million a year. How did they go untaxed all of these years? And more broadly, what is your tax plan then to level the playing field?
Well, as you mentioned, anybody can see it for themselves at curtissliwaformayor.com. They can see all of my policy positions. But I looked at Madison Square Garden, and they were given a sweetheart deal years ago when they threatened to go to the Meadowlands if they had to pay property tax. I would tell them right now, go ahead, go to the Meadowlands. It really worked out for the Nets. They're in Barclays Center now. Secondarily, they were getting wine, dined, and pocket lined back and forth with politicians. They were being very supportive of them, going back to Ed Koch. So now you say they pay no property taxes. And worse yet, there's Columbia University. It sits on an endowment of $11 billion, and they're buying up all kinds of property in Morningside Heights, which takes it off the property tax rolls. And likewise, NYU, $4 billion of money that they're sitting on in an endowment, and they're buying up like half of Greenwich Village, and they pay no property taxes on that. I said, hey, we'll have a dedicated property tax from that, as Dinkins and a guy named Peter Vallone Sr. developed right before Rudy was elected in 1993. It was called Safe City, Safe Streets. It was a dedicated tax to hire and train more cops. We need 38,000 cops here in New York City. We're down to 34,500. And with early retirements, it's going to get down to 32,000. And that puts us in a perilous position. So I say, put the property tax in effect. It'll allow us to hire 3,000 new police officers. And then obviously we have to give them a mandate to take the handcuffs off of themselves and put them on the criminals who are committing the crimes, so we can have safe streets, safe subways, and safe parks again.
I know that you want to support seniors as well, and you want a tax deduction for seniors with a household income below $75K.
Well, I know, and anybody listening or watching out there now, don't lie to me. I know every night Florida is flirting with you, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Texas. People have one foot out the door for a variety of reasons. And my whole campaign is based on improve, don't move. Improve, don't move. So in this particular case, the senior citizens are most likely to want to move because somebody comes along, gives them a lot of money for a house that's nowhere near worth that amount of money, and it gives them an opportunity to go to Florida or somewhere else. So I don't want them to be charged property tax if they're 65 years or older, earning under $75,000 a year. I want them to have to pay property tax. We need them to stay here. If this exodus continues, we're not going to be able to fill the void. You know, our President Mayor Bill de Blasio says to everyone leaving, whoever they are, hey, make sure the door doesn't hit you behind on your way out. We keep acting like that. Who's going to pay the taxes? Who's going to be able to have the income to go out and spend it on all the cultural entities and the entertainment entities and the bars and restaurants and retail and wholesale establishments once we open up 24/7, 365. So I'm trying to retain the people who are here instead of watch a continued mass exodus. And reality is going to hit. We're facing a $6 billion debt come January 1st and an additional one 12 months later of $6 billion. It's going to put us on the cusp of going fiscally insolvent, which we almost did in the 1970s. And that's going to mean restraints in terms of how we spend tax dollars of the people out in New York City. And I want to make sure that we've got those checks and balances in effect, and we're not spending money like drunken sailors, of which de Blasio has been guilty of.
I want to ask you about pot, or as the British like to call it, cannabis, which seems so much more of a civilized word. Is the genie out of the bottle on this one, Curtis? Because everywhere you go in the city, the whole place smells of pot. I mean, someone smokes pot and then they go into the subway and the whole car just reeks of it. So where do you fall on all of this, and what should we be doing to regulate it?
Well, look, New York State, it's been a dollar short and a day late. They've legalized it, but they haven't put the modus operandi into effect like there are in other states. We have to do this because it's everywhere. And to suggest that we could have a war on drugs and be able to stop pot, I mean, that goes back to Richard Nixon when he was actually sending Americans, DEA agents, and they were using pesticides in all the fields that were growing marijuana in Mexico. It didn't stop it. It's not going to stop now. It's the cash crop. In fact, Canada has grown so much, you can't even sell it. You know, there's supply and demand now. So what we have to do is be smart and not make the mistake that other states have made, like California and Colorado, which have taxed it too much. Because if you impose too much of a tax, then the black market continues because there's no taxes there, and it forces them to improve their strains, their buds, their quality, and not ripping you off with seeds and stems. But I would say an 8.5% sales tax, like you would on all other products, instead of the gargantuan amount of money that some states charge, 20%, 16%. Basically, it's a legalized product, so you don't have to take the same risks as when you buy it in the street. But in reality, you're paying so much of it in tax. And that's what government gets so greedy. Just want to tax everything from the cradle to the grave. And I'm just in opposition to that. You got to allow the free market system to get involved in that.
But how do we regulate it from the standpoint of, if I'm walking down the street, I don't want, I'm coming out of the gym, for example. I don't want to be bombarded with this pot smell. In the previous building that I was living in, for example, the kids outside used to be smoking pot, and then the whole lobby would smell of pot, and then the little kids that were waiting for their school bus would have to inhale this. So is there a way of regulating it so that those of us that don't smoke pot, that don't take drugs, aren't impacted by it?
Yeah, well, we certainly don't want you to have to walk around with a hazmat suit on, especially when it's 90 degrees or above. You'll be schwitzing in there. I haven't quite figured that out because, there's open consumption of alcohol, which leads to all kinds of problems. There's open smoking, where everyone now who smokes cigarettes, cigars, tiparillos, or pipes, they go outside, or if they're just, vaping, you don't know what they're vaping until you smell what the after amount is. That's a very, very difficult concept to approach, how you would sort of rein it in. But I'm certainly open to more ideas. You see, I'm not omnipotent. I'm not pretentious. I don't think I know it all like everybody who runs for office. Oh, I got the answer. That is an incredibly difficult thing to tackle because right now, as you mentioned, you can walk down the street, people are vaping, you would never know it. And it's like a plume over your head. And you're saying, I wonder, is that Maui Wowie or Hindu Kush? You're trying to determine the strain of it just based on the smell. And then some of it's just pure old-fashioned ragweed that we used to smoke as kids. It's like a stink bomb. So you've given me pause for thought here in terms of what I would do with that when legalization for recreational use of marijuana is in full effect, about the after effects.
Right. So stay tuned for that one. One thing that I do want to ask you about, though, are the safer subways, because as I said, as the founder of the Guardian Angels, you've been patrolling the subways for 42 years. And I will say, Curtis, shortly after I moved to New York City in 2006, I remember seeing you across the subway car from me. So you really walk the walk and talk the talk, and you're still out there on the subway and in the streets. I know that you want to add more uniformed undercover NYPD officers to patrol the subways, also MTA officers to combat fare evasion. You want to remove emotionally disturbed persons from the subways and bring them to psychiatric care facilities, as well as remove homeless people from subways and bring them to homeless shelters. As we say in Yiddish, that's a real Nebuch situation. I mean, my heart really goes out for these people, but I'm just wondering, how do you do it, Curtis? How do you bring them to get the care that they need so that, for example, civil libertarians don't impede that process? Like, what's the plan for that?
I'd say to civil libertarians, go down in the subway, which I ride all the time. No other candidates do, and spend like 72 hours straight in a subway. And if you are in control of your mental and physical faculties, watch how you suddenly lose control. And by the way, where do you go to the bathroom?
Yeah.
First thing I ask the civil libertarians, hey, guess what? They closed all the bathrooms. Where are the homeless or the emotionally disturbed going to go? Everyone has to relieve themselves, from a billionaire to somebody who throws nickels around like manhole covers. There's no place to go. That's number one. Number two, it's clear that those that have emotional issues, many of them are already on medication that they've run out of. And you can actually see, I check their wrists all the time. They have the wristbands on, what hospital they recently were in, where they were discharged or they left, what medication they're on, and they all acknowledge that they're not taking their meds. We got to get them into a facility. It's the humane thing to do. It's the compassionate thing to do. Leaving them wallowing in their own defecation and urine. How is that progressive? How is that compassionate? How is that being a civil libertarian? If we saw a baby walking around in a dirty water diaper, we'd be in horror. Oh my God. Some of these men and women have the mind of a child. They're disconnected. They need help. And the homeless, they're also lost souls. And what we've done is we've built all of these shelters and shoved them into neighborhoods that don't want shelters. So immediately there's this antagonism. We don't have programs for these single able-bodied men and single able-bodied women for their drug problems, their alcohol problems, their emotional issues. All we do is warehouse them. You got to be in by 10 o'clock at night. They kick you out the door at 7:30 in the morning, and then you roam the neighborhood. And it's nothing but double trouble because you got to feed your beast, whatever habit you have. And that means you're shoplifting, you're trying to rip things off. It just causes chaos. So this is what I would do. A, you approach people who clearly fit those categories. You remove them and you get them first cleaned up, get them fresh clothes, get them some decent food, check on their medications, or just a lot of them are dehydrated. Where are they going to get water from? And people, hey, think of it. If you walked in the shoes of a homeless person, an emotionally disturbed person, where are you going to go to a bathroom and where are you going to get water from? It's not like we have water fountains around. You dehydrate, and that causes you to get even to more psychosis. So all these things can be addressed. We used to have a great homeless outreach effort with the NYPD. These are men and women who were specifically trained to deal with the homeless and emotionally disturbed. They were disbanded when we defunded $1 billion from the police budget. How did that work out? That should immediately be put back into effect because these men and women, they know exactly how to approach the homeless and emotionally disturbed and get them the care that they need. It can be done. It has to be done, or especially women are not going to ride the subways. And then there are the guys on the subways who want to prove to every woman that they're not suffering from erectile dysfunction. They're pervs. And they continue their perpetual violators of women. And guys say, what are you talking about? I don't see them out there. Of course not. They're not bothering you, but they're bothering women. And women have opted out from taking the subways whenever they don't have to. The same, likewise with some men. So you're never going to get up to the pre-pandemic levels that can sustain the system financially. Right now, you stand near the turnstiles and look at all the fare evasion. And I'm not talking about people who are poor and indigent. I'm talking about middle-class people, if you stop them, they got a knot of money in their pocket. They're just figuring, hey, nobody else is paying the fare. I'm not going to pay the fare either. In fact, Eric Adams, who is my opponent, believe it or not, the craziest thing I've ever heard him say, he wants free fare. He doesn't want anyone to have to pay a subway or a bus fare. And that will lead to all-out anarchy in the bus and the subway system. And how are you going to sustain it financially? There's no more money coming from Washington. It's over. That stimulus is gone.
I want to move on then to animal welfare, because you talked about closing down the animal shelters, which I'm in total agreement with, by the way. Related to that, though, Curtis, can you also address the rat issue? Because I've noticed over the last couple of years, just these enormous rodents that are not only all over the subway, because we've seen them always, but here in the streets. I mean, I'm also on the Upper West Side, several blocks from probably where you live, and they're just all over the place.
Yeah, in fact, rats, rodents, mice, they're nocturnal. So especially at night when the sun goes down, they're roaming about, they're foraging for food. And then we have de Blasio, who just keeps pumping pesticides into the soil and setting up rat traps, in which they only become immune to it. And it causes problems for birds, for cats, for dogs, for children who are playing in the dirt. It's not eliminating the rat problem. Right now, there's no form of trapping and neutering rats. Eric Adams was drowning them as Brooklyn Borough president. I was like, whoa, what is that, Eric? That's not an answer to it. The answer is the bodega cat in stores, in apartments, in buildings, and cat colonies outside. My wife, Nancy, has managed cat colonies for years in Brooklyn. And these are feral cats. These are cats that are never going to come into your house or your apartment. They're not domesticated. They live in a colony. They have a patriarch, they have a matriarch. And as long as food is provided, water is provided, they'll stay in that area. And when that happens, one thing you're guaranteed of: no rats, mice, or rodents come around, because they can smell the cats. Instinctively, they stay away. And in fact, there's been studies that a mother rat could be carrying a litter. She'll immediately abort it out of fear. And you know how many litters a mother rat could have within the course of just 1 year alone. You go up to a place like Washington Heights, where it's an epidemic problem, the rats, and you look at the vendors outside of the stores, there are men and women with tables, and the number one item they're selling is rat poison, because the demand is so great. And I'm telling all of these people, just get one cat in that apartment. You won't have a rat problem. Even if the building is infested with rats, which many of those old tenements are, that rat, the mouse, the rodent will smell the cat and will stay out of that apartment, just like they do out of stores. And yet the Department of Health won't let you have a bodega cat. And you say to yourself, why? Hey, naturally, it's Mother Nature's way. No, we got to use pesticides. You think maybe that's a little more dangerous to humans than a cat, a bodega cat, or outside, a feral cat that's part of a cat colony? That's the much better approach. In fact, Chicago has the worst rat problem now. They don't have enough cats. So they're asking for cats from other cities, from their animal control and shelters, to be brought to Chicago so that they can develop them into cat colonies to ward off the rat, the mouse, and the rodent problem. And they've done that because they are in the worst circumstance. I've recommended that here in New York City, and it's like it goes in one ear and out the other. Because let's face it, there are millions of dollars involved in these contracts for pesticides that do nothing at all to limit the problem and poison the air, poison the water, and poison the dirt.
Interestingly, Curtis, that after World War II, the city of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, was overrun with rats, and they actually imported cats from the city of Yaroslavl to help control the rat population. And to this day, and I think even before World War II, there were cats in the basements of the Hermitage, the famed museum in St. Petersburg, to actually combat the rat problem. And so that it's nature's way, as you said, of combating rats and rodents. I want to move on to vocational training and education in your platform, because as I always like to say, if your toilet backs up, you don't want to call an anthropology major, you want to call a plumber. So talk about your vocational training program and the importance that we need to place on really teaching skills to young people.
Look, it's all based, again, on capitalism. We're not a socialist society. It's capitalism. There's supply and demand. We don't have enough supply of trained carpenters, electricians, plumbers, computer programmers, and the most important area that nobody wants to talk about, home health care aides. Because I'm probably maybe a decade away where all of a sudden I'm going to be in bed, and the home health care aide will be assigned so that I don't deplete the resources of society with the long-term senior citizen care units, or maybe even being hospitalized. And plus, I'd rather be in my own apartment or my own house, as most people would. But right now, the people available to do that have minimal skills, are not proficient in many instances in English, and they have to deal with the psychology of the older person who starts developing dementia and Alzheimer's, and they start acting up, and they're problematic. You need really trained home health care workers. We could be producing them out of our high schools. And I would make demands that, we're going to have far more vocational training centers in public schools, charter schools. You're going to have to do it. I know, oh no, we're only there for the academic elite. Oh no, you will no longer be just for the academic elite. You're going to have vocational training schools also, and parochial schools and religious schools who've done a great job during the pandemic. They were the only ones to have in-classroom training with teachers and students there. But I'm going to say to them, any thought of vouchers or tuition tax credits are going to include vocational training. We have to issue visas in order to get these trained people into our country. When we have more than enough young people, if we were to teach them a trade, they'd be able to care for themselves. And if they decided to have a family, they'd be at least able to care for themselves and maybe even develop their own small businesses, which is the American entrepreneurial spirit. How ironic. You get through high school, you can't even read at grade level. You can't get into a CUNY facility because then you have to take remedial training for the first 2 years. And yet you have all these professional schools like Apex that'd be more than happy to take a Pell Grant at taxpayers' expense. We had a captive audience when they were in junior high school. We didn't give them vocational training. And so some professional school comes along, they drain us with the Pell Grants, and they give the young adults the skills they need. But we could have done that much earlier in the educational process. But we all think, academic excellence. I got to tell you, if not for vocational training high schools in the city school, public school system, a lot of my cousins who were real knuckle draggers would have probably been doing triple life without parole in Attica as we speak. They were well on their way to being enemies of society, and getting a trade totally revamped them. Some of them became small businessmen, small businesswomen, and they were able to raise their own families and live at least that portion of the American dream that they never even thought they'd participate in.
Right. One or two more points on your platform. But before we get to that, if you don't mind, Curtis, when I look at your policies, I don't see them as Republican or I don't see them as Democrat. I see them as just common sense. And, it's not appropriate for me to endorse anybody here on this program because I like to keep it as a forum for everybody to share his and her views. But how do we move away from the word Republican, dare I say, being a dirty word in many circles, because we need to get people to talk about the issues and how to solve the issues versus if it's a Republican platform or a Democratic platform or a Republican candidate or a Democratic candidate, especially here in New York City, where, 7-1 registered Democrats to Republicans. So how do we move beyond that to really begin to talk about the issues? I mean, because you're talking about the issues, Eric Adams talking about the issues, but the general media out there and the general population is still fixated on party.
Oh, yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the last national election, January 6th, the insurrection, the questions about Dominion, Smartmatic, is the vote fair? And that just split the country even more. Whereas when I was running in the Republican primary, my opponent, Fernando Mateo, spent $1 million educating Republicans that Curtis is not a Republican and he's an ever-Trumper. Well, he was right about that. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I didn't vote for Biden. I didn't vote for Hillary, but I voted for independent candidates. But I am a populist, not in the method of, let's say, go back to William Jennings Bryan, who introduced populism into the Democratic Party, although he hated Catholics, not that kind of populism. Or even recently, Steve Bannon, who's adapted America First lingo to populism. That's not the kind of populism that I'm talking about. I can go into neighborhoods as a Republican candidate where the only Republican they've ever seen is Abraham Lincoln on a $5 bill. Because people say, oh, that's Curtis. He's been here before. Yeah, I agree with this. I disagree with that. But we can engage in discourse. Whereas typical Republicans, if they go into a neighborhood, hey, you support Trump? What about January 6th? And they run them out. And so there's fear, fright, hysteria, and hype. And likewise, there are a lot of Republicans who are averse to anyone who's a Democrat. So we have to get rid of those party labels. Look, I'm all for nonpartisan elections. I'm not your traditional Republican. I believe in initiative and referendum. I want people to choose, not politicians. I say trust the people. Don't trust the politicians. And that includes me. Because I'm now a politician. I'm not a politician. The moment you kiss your first baby and shake your first hand and you're running for office, you are a politician. And a politician, if given the opportunity, and that would include me, are going to give you their razzmatazz, their propaganda. They're going to employ the DID method, which is deny you have a problem, ignore it, delay doing anything about it. That's why the free press has to hold our hands and feet to the fire. They can't be friends with politicians. They've got to be the politician's worst adversary because it's the only way to maintain a level of truth. And who else is going to be able to pry open the truth from politicians who want to secure themselves in a propaganda machine that makes you feel like they're the Mashiach? You're great, and they can walk on water. Without them, you can't survive. Whereas I'm telling people, guess what? You don't need me or anyone else in many instances unless it's an emergency. You need to do more for yourself. You shouldn't be looking to government to take care of you from the cradle to the grave. You need a lot more self-help because then if you're independent and autonomous from government, you won't accept all the constant verbal flotsam and jetsam that comes out of the mouth of politicians.
I want to ask you about one more item on your platform, but before we get to that, you invoked Eric Adams right now. So, I mean, clearly plan A is for Curtis Silwa to win the mayor's race. If you were to win the mayor's race, would you consider having Eric Adams as part of your administration?
No, that would be like having Cuomo or de Blasio. They're all 2.0.
Okay.
In fact, I was amazed. Eric Adams barely won the Democratic primary. He didn't need to be embracing de Blasio, who single-handedly has been the worst mayor of my lifetime. And he didn't need to get on a stage with the Governor Groper Cuomo there, who is just weeks away from now all of a sudden facing the possibility that he may have to leave office and may be impeached. He could have stood independently and autonomously from them. But to me, when I see Cuomo, I see Eric Adams, I see de Blasio, it's all Cuomo de Blasio 2.0. So I would not accept him in any capacity. I will tell you what, though, I would have to accept a lot of Democrats, because in this town, a lot of the experts, a lot of those cognoscenti, a lot of those who know how to make government work are Democrats. And all I'm going to say to them is, hey, just show me how we can do more with less, because we're on the brink of a fiscal collapse. We may go bankrupt, and we're not going to be able to spend money like de Blasio was spending it, because we don't have that money.
Right. And dare I ask, Curtis, there's always a plan A and a plan B. Plan B is if Curtis doesn't make it and Eric Adams were to ask you to serve in his administration, would you say yes?
Interesting. It would have to be in a capacity that Eric Adams just doesn't want to deal with. And I would say he's not going to get rid of Thrive, which has been a program that has sucked up $1.25 billion of tax dollars, created for Mrs. de Blasio to run, although she has no expertise and hasn't been accountable to where the money has gone. So I would say, Eric, if you're insistent on keeping Thrive alive, because that's probably the quid pro quo with de Blasio's for their support, put me in charge, because I'll show you how to do outreach to the emotionally disturbed in the streets, the parks, and the subways with compassion, is what they need. And the taxpayers will then know their money for the emotionally disturbed and those with mental ailments is being spent wisely and compassionately.
All right. Listen, one other point in your platform, another question, then we're going to push off into the sunset, because I know you got to take care of those 16 cats, and also you got to go back on the campaign trail there. It's your right to business, because at the end of the day, New York City is about small business.
Yeah, look at all this commercial space that is empty, millions of square feet. And yet the big developers, they're whining and dining and pocket lining Eric Adams. They say, yeah, we need developments, like in Sunset Park and Sunnyside Yards. And look at the Hudson Yards. It's a ghost town. How can you be developing any new developments where we haven't even repurposed all the millions of square feet of commercial space that either has to become repurposed into affordable housing or other uses? The best way is to take the brand new immigrants into this country, whether they're legal or undocumented, and they come to America because they have the American dream, rags to riches. Help them get into business. And what you got to do is give them an easy pass approach to fill up that commercial space. And you got to cut through all the permits, the licenses, the fees, the fines, put them into business, give them an easy pass, apply a mentor to them, and a man or a woman who may have been in business before can guide them through the problems, and just stop, driving business people out of business by constantly finding them, constantly sending your inspectors in, and give them an opportunity to grow and develop. And I think that right to business program is perfect for all immigrants who really still believe in the American dream, and a lot of third, fourth, fifth generation Americans. That's the way you fill up that space, where it becomes productive, where you're generating payroll taxes, where the landlords are not going to have a distressed property any longer that they abandon or can't pay property taxes on. But let the marketplace do that. Government always messes that kind of stuff up. The marketplace will resolve that, because there's this huge supply, this limited demand, and people are already making deals with one another in order to continue to coexist and do business.
Yeah, get the government out of the way and let the people lead. Listen, before we really wrap, what's your favorite thing to do here in New York City, Curtis?
Favorite thing to do in what little off time that I have is listen to electronic dance music.
Really?
Whirling dervish. And most people would say it's 67, Curtis. Who's 67 and listening to electronic dance music? That's more the kind of music that my wife's generation, as a hipster and millennial, Nancy, would listen to. And yet me, I started with disco, with the polyester waffle weave, flame retardant pants, marshmallow shoes. I was Travolta Jr. in Saturday Night Fever. And then all of a sudden there was house music that filled that void. And then when EDM hit, I first discovered it when organizing the Guardian Angels in London back in the late 80s along the wharfs of London. It was like, wow, I saw a rave. And I've been entranced ever since. I'm a whirling dervish. It's my natural mood elevator, because everything else sometimes is really depressing. And I'll listen to electronic dance music and I'm right back on track.
So Curtis, so if you do win the election, we know what kind of music's going to be playing at your election party night celebration.
There's no. There won't be any celebration. Are you kidding? What's to celebrate? We're going to be bankrupt. You got to get to work right away. For me, my celebration will be to go down into the bowels of New York City in the subways and thank all the people that I've ridden the subways with since I was 5 years old. I've been riding the subways by myself. It was the LL line, the lousy line, now the L train from Rockaway Parkway in Canarsie, and I've been riding it by myself ever since. I'm going to thank them for being the focus group that kept me on track. And no, we're starting, no parties, no raise the roof. I'll listen to my EDM in the wee hours of the morning, when I'm catching a few Z's and I need a mood elevation and we want to raise the roof, party hardy that way.
Sounds like a plan. Curtis Silwa, we're going to leave it right there. Enormous thanks, truly, for joining us here on the One Way Ticket Show, and we'll see you on Election Day, November 2nd.
Nothing better than theater of the mind, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to remain sane in a time with so much crisis and so much pressure and stress, I suggest EDM first, electronic dance music, and theater of the mind. Just listen to radio. It is so good in podcasts and everything that stimulates your mind.
Well said. All right, we'll have info and a link to all things Curtis Sliwa on the show notes page of this episode on our website, theonewayticketshow.com. And this episode has been very proudly brought to you by our good friends over at Travel Wi-Fi, makers of the pocket-sized mobile device known as the Teppy. You just stick it in your pocket or bag for secure Wi-Fi anywhere in more than 130 countries worldwide. Do visit travelwifi.com to learn more, or we'll have a link to Travel Wi-Fi on the homepage of our website and the show notes page of this episode. And if you use the promo code One Way Ticket, you do get 15% off rental or purchase of a Teppy. And no matter where you are in the world, do shoot me an email, Stephen@theonewayticketshow.com. That's Stephen with a V. Share your one-way ticket destination. Let's even arrange a call and chat, because I'm always up for a great conversation. Meantime, it's a wrap for this edition of the One-Way Ticket Show. For Curtis Sliwa and the entire crew, I'm Stephen Shalowitz, and we'll see you next time.